Atlanta's skyline glowed under the setting sun, the glass towers catching streaks of gold and crimson. Nina Carter walked quickly along Peachtree Street, her heels clicking against the pavement. She had just left the office after another long day, but despite her exhaustion, she felt proud. At 27, she had secured a communications role at a major firm downtown, a job she had prayed for, worked late nights for, sacrificed sleep for. To her, it felt like the beginning of everything. Waiting for her at their favorite cafe was Camille Harris, the friend who had been at Nina's side since childhood. Camille was the kind of person who turned heads when she walked into a room. Her laughter was loud, her fashion bold, and her confidence magnetic. Nina admired that about her. Where Nina was cautious and methodical, Camille was spontaneous and daring. It had always felt like their personalities balanced each other out. As soon as Nina slid into the booth, Camille raised her glass of iced tea with a grin. "To you, boss lady. Climbing the ladder like it was made for you." Nina blushed, lifting her glass. Compliments always made her shy, but Camille's enthusiasm felt genuine, like a torch warming her spirit. They clinked glasses, and for a moment Nina believed nothing could ever shake the foundation of their friendship. Over the years, they had collected countless memories, sleepovers filled with whispered secrets, road trips where they sang off-key to Beyoncé, nights of crying over heartbreaks and mornings of laughter that erased the tears. Nina thought of Camille not just as a friend, but as family, someone who knew her roots, her flaws, her dreams. That kind of bond Nina believed was unbreakable. But envy is a silent shadow, creeping in unnoticed until it consumes the light. Nina didn't see it then. How Camille's smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, how her teasing carried a sharper edge whenever Nina celebrated a victory. At the cafe that night, Camille leaned across the table and asked casually, "So, when are you going to be running that company?" Nina laughed it off, but something in Camille's tone felt like a challenge rather than a cheer. The first real crack appeared a few weeks later. Nina had sent a confidential email to her boss, suggesting a new strategy for a client. She had only mentioned the details to Camille over dinner, bragging about how bold it felt to pitch something new. The next morning, Nina walked into the office and felt the air shift. People stared at her, whispered behind hands. Her boss called her in, face grim, and laid the printed email on the table. But it wasn't the same. Phrases were twisted, the tone altered to sound disrespectful. "Nina, this looks like you're undermining leadership," her boss said sternly. Nina's stomach dropped. She explained she hadn't written it like that something was wrong, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Her cheeks burned as she left his office, humiliated and shaken. How could something so private have been twisted? That evening, she called Camille, desperate for comfort. "I don't know what happened," Nina said, her voice cracking. "The email I wrote got changed somehow, and now my boss thinks I disrespected him. Camille, I'm so scared." Silence hung for a moment on the other end before Camille finally replied. "Maybe you should have been more careful," she said flatly. The words hit like a slap. Nina froze, expecting concern but hearing indifference. That night, Nina couldn't sleep. She replayed Camille's words again and again. Why hadn't she been sympathetic? Why hadn't she reassured her like always? Something about her tone had felt wrong. Cold. Detached. For the first time in their friendship, Nina felt a wall between them, invisible but heavy. The truth didn't come out immediately, but whispers eventually reached Nina. Camille had been bragging to mutual friends about knowing things about Nina's job. One person even admitted Camille had shown them the email before it blew up. Nina's hands trembled when she heard it. Betrayal wasn't a stranger's blade. It was a wound delivered by the person she trusted. Nina tried to convince herself it was a misunderstanding. She invited Camille to Piedmont Park on Saturday, hoping sunlight and open air would clear whatever fog had gathered between them. Camille arrived late, sunglasses on, smile a little too bright. "Girl, you're overthinking," she said, tossing her braid. People talk. You know how offices are. Nina nodded, but the reassurance felt thin, like plastic flowers pretending to be alive. At work, the fallout grew. Her boss reassigned her from a flagship campaign to internal copy edits. No one read. Colleagues who once asked her for advice now avoided eye contact in the break room. Nina's inbox, once buzzing, went quiet. She swallowed the hurt, told herself to focus, to rebuild. But every time she opened her laptop, she remembered the email, its warped tone, its weaponized edges, and the ache sharpened. One afternoon, she found a printed page in the copy room. Her proposal, annotated in red pen with mocking comments. Ambitious or naive? Who does she think she is? Nina held the page like it burned. The handwriting looked familiar. Curvy, dramatic loops. Camille's. She'd seen it on birthday cards, post-it notes, the grocery lists they'd shared in college apartments. Her chest tightened as a hot clarity pushed away denial. That evening, Nina drove to Camille's apartment in Midtown without calling first. The city glimmered, restaurants spilling laughter onto sidewalks, traffic lights blinking like metronomes. Camille opened the door in a silky robe, music pulsing behind her. "Nina, surprise visit," she asked, playful. "We need to talk," Nina said, stepping inside. The room smelled like warm vanilla and ambition. "Did you show my email to anyone?" Camille's smile faltered. "Why would I do that?" she replied, voice light but eyes wary. Nina held up the annotated page. "Your handwriting. Your loops on the D's. I know them." A beat of silence stretched, thin and dangerous. Camille shifted, the robe whispering against her skin. "Maybe I made notes because I care. Maybe I was trying to help you, not look foolish." "Help," Nina repeated, astonished. "My boss thinks I'm insubordinate. I'm off the project. I fought to lead. That isn't help." Camille's jaw tightened. "You walk into rooms and people like you. You make it look easy. I've been grinding twice as hard for half the recognition. Forgive me for wanting a little gravity to pull you down to earth." The words hit with an honesty that felt like a bruise. Nina's fingers trembled, but her voice steadied. "So you leaked it. You twisted my words. You turned my win into a weapon." Camille's eyes flashed, pride staking its claim. "I didn't twist anything that wasn't already risky. You gamble with ideas. I live with consequences. Do you know what it's like to watch you get praise I can't reach?" She folded her arms, armor snapping into place. "I cheered for you," Nina whispered. "When you didn't get that internship, I stayed up all night reworking your resume. When you moved apartments, I hauled boxes in the rain. When your heart broke, I cooked for a week. I loved you like a sister." Tears stung, not from sorrow alone, but from the recognition that the old map of their bond no longer matched the terrain. Camille looked away, jaw working. "Maybe that's the problem," she said softly. "You love like a saint. I love like a survivor." It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. The music behind them thumped, a bass line for the moment things split. Nina placed the annotated page on the table, an artifact of a friendship's undoing. "Then we want different kinds of love," she said, turning for the door. Outside, Atlanta's night pressed warm against her skin. Traffic hummed. A street vendor laughed with a couple under string lights. Life moved on, uninterested in two women learning how distance begins. Nina sat in her car, hands on the wheel, breathing through a grief that felt both intimate and public. The skyline glittered like 1,000 small exits. She chose one, forward. She drove, not home, but toward whatever healing required. The next week I crawled. Nina went through the motions at work, answering emails, proofreading memos, smiling when required. But her mind kept circling the wound. At night, her apartment felt cavernous, silence pressing on her like weight. She scrolled through old photos, her and Camille in graduation gowns, at concerts on road trips. Their smiles looked permanent back then, like nothing could shatter them. Now they felt like photographs of strangers. One afternoon, she ran into Tasha, a mutual friend from college, at a bookstore in Little Five Points. Tasha hugged her tightly, then pulled back to study her face. "Girl, you look tired. You okay?" Nina hesitated before answering. "Just work stress." But Tasha's raised brow prodded her honesty. "I heard about Camille," Tasha said quietly. "She's been running her mouth. You didn't deserve that." Nina's throat tightened. The betrayal wasn't private anymore. It was public currency. "I keep asking myself if I missed the signs," Nina admitted. They sat on a bench outside the shop, cars rattling by. Did I ignore the jealousy in her jokes? Did I love her too blindly? Tasha shook her head. "You trusted your friend. That's not blindness, that's loyalty. Don't confuse the two." The words soothed, but only a little. Days later, an email landed in Nina's inbox. An invitation to present at a conference in Charlotte. It was small, regional, but a chance to rebuild her professional reputation. Her first thought was Camille. Once, she would have called her screaming with excitement. Now she sat alone on her couch, staring at the invite. The silence where Camille's voice should have been felt louder than the television humming in the background. She accepted the offer. Preparing the presentation consumed her evenings. Research papers littered her table. Sticky notes clung to walls, and highlighters bled neon trails across drafts. For the first time in weeks, she felt purpose crack open the darkness. But when she practiced in front of her mirror, a voice inside whispered, Camille would have laughed at that slide. Camille would have teased you for saying that word wrong. Even absent, her betrayal lingered. The night before the conference, Nina packed her bag with trembling hands. She scrolled through her phone, hovering over Camille's name. Part of her longed for the old ritual, the pep talk, the silly memes, the "you got this, girl." But memory had turned sharp, reminding her that Camille wasn't her cheerleader anymore. With a deep breath, she set the phone down. "Not this time," she whispered. In Charlotte, the conference buzzed with nervous energy. Speakers shuffled papers, attendees sipped coffee, screens flickered with slides. Nina stood at the podium, palms damp, heart pounding. As she began, her voice shook, but then steadied. She spoke about communication strategies, weaving data with stories, turning her scars into lessons. By the end, the applause felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. People lined up to ask questions, to praise her clarity, to hand her business cards. That night in her hotel room, Nina cried, not from sadness but from release. The betrayal still stung, but it hadn't destroyed her. She had stood alone and still shone. For the first time since the email incident, she felt whole, like her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. Back in Atlanta, Camille called. The name flashing on her screen made Nina's stomach twist. She let it ring out, then listened to the voicemail later. "Nina, we need to talk. I miss us. Call me back." The voice was softer, almost fragile, but Nina couldn't forget the steel edge from before. She set the phone aside, uncertain whether the wound was ready for contact. That weekend, Nina walked through the Beltline, watching families bike past, street artists painting murals, buskers strumming guitars. Life moved in color and sound, reminding her she wasn't stuck. She whispered to herself, "Some bonds break, so others can form." The wind tugged her hair, carrying away the heaviness. Step by step, she felt the betrayal shift, not an anchor, but a lesson shaping her stride. Monday morning brought an unexpected delivery, a bouquet of lilies, Camille's signature peace offering. The note read, "For old time's sake, can we talk?" Nina stared at the flowers on her desk, their fragrance filling the office. Once, she would have been touched. Now she felt conflicted. Were they a symbol of regret or manipulation? She left them in the break room, unwilling to carry them home. That evening, Camille showed up at Nina's apartment unannounced. Her knock was hesitant but persistent. Nina opened the door, arms crossed. Camille looked smaller somehow, her usual bravado muted. "Can I come in?" she asked. After a pause, Nina stepped aside, though every part of her wanted distance. The air between them was heavy, a battlefield without smoke. "I shouldn't have done it," Camille admitted, eyes darting to the floor. "I was jealous. You were shining and I felt stuck. I thought if I pulled you down, maybe I'd feel taller. But it didn't make me feel better. It just made me lose my best friend." Her voice cracked on the last word. Nina swallowed, heart aching, but memory flashed. The mocking notes, the cold phone call, the betrayal. "You didn't just make a mistake, Camille," Nina said softly but firmly. "You made a choice. You betrayed my trust. You broke something sacred." Tears welled in Camille's eyes. "I know, and I hate myself for it." She reached out, but Nina stepped back, the distance louder than words. "I don't know if I can ever see you the same way again," Nina confessed. They sat in silence, the hum of the refrigerator filling the room. Camille finally whispered, "Tell me what I can do." Nina shook her head. "This isn't a problem you can fix with flowers or apologies. Trust isn't a faucet you turn back on. It takes time, and even then it may never flow the same." Camille nodded, lips trembling before standing to leave. "At the door," she said, "I'll wait, if you'll ever let me back." Then she was gone. In the days that followed, Nina felt lighter, not because forgiveness had been granted, but because truth had been spoken. She journaled late into the night, her pen scratching across pages filled with anger, sorrow, and slowly, clarity. "I am not defined by who betrayed me," she wrote. "I am defined by how I rise after the fall." At church one Sunday, the pastor preached about pruning, how dead branches must be cut for a tree to bear fruit. Nina sat in the pew, hands folded, and realized her friendship with Camille had been a branch she clung to even as it withered. Letting go wasn't cruelty, it was survival. The metaphor wrapped around her heart, loosening the grip of guilt. One afternoon, she met Tasha again at the cafe. Over steaming cups of chai, she shared everything. Camille's visit, the apology, her torn feelings. Tasha listened quietly before saying, "You don't owe anyone reconciliation. Forgiveness is for you, but trust is earned. Don't confuse the two." Nina nodded, grateful for the distinction. It was permission to heal without rushing back into old wounds. Slowly, Nina built new rhythms. She joined a book club, reconnected with colleagues who valued her, and even started mentoring interns at work. Every smile she offered, every piece of advice she gave, felt like stitching herself back together. The scar remained, but scars, she realized, were proof of survival, not shame. Meanwhile, Camille's absence grew louder. Occasionally, Nina saw her posts online, selfies at brunch, captions about new beginnings. Each time, a pang struck, but it softened with time. Camille was moving on in her own way, and so was Nina. Their paths had diverged not because of fate, but because choices had carved the road. For Nina, the destination ahead was no longer shadowed by betrayal, it was lit by growth. Months later, Nina stood on the balcony of her apartment, the Atlantis skyline glittering like scattered jewels. She held a glass of sweet tea, the night air brushing her cheeks. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, steady, authentic, no longer weighed down by shadows of betrayal. She thought of Camille less often now, and when she did, it was with a strange mix of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for what was lost, gratitude for the lessons carved from pain. At work, her reputation had healed. The Charlotte conference had opened new doors, and she was now leading a small team on a major project. Her boss, once skeptical, now praised her perseverance. Nina learned to celebrate wins quietly, humbly, without the need for validation from anyone else. She no longer longed for Camille's applause. She had found her own rhythm, her own strength. One evening, after a long day, Nina attended a networking dinner. As laughter rippled across the table and new friends clinked glasses, she realized something profound. She was surrounded by people who celebrated her without envy, who lifted her without fear of being left behind. It was at that moment she finally understood what real friendship looked like. Not perfection, but presence, not competition, but care. Back home, she opened her journal and wrote one last reflection. Betrayal hurt me, but it also freed me. It taught me that not every bond is meant to last forever. Some are lessons, not lifelines. And sometimes losing someone clears space for who we're becoming. She closed the book with a calm smile, knowing the chapter was complete. As midnight painted the city in quiet stillness, Nina whispered to herself, "I survived." It wasn't a cry of pain anymore. It was a declaration of victory. Betrayal had broken her once, but healing had rebuilt her stronger. And those scars remained. They shimmered like armor under the city lights. With her heart steady and her eyes forward, Nina stepped into tomorrow, no longer defined by who betrayed her, but by how beautifully she had risen. Thank you for watching.